1973년 수교 이래
Since the establishment of diplomatic ties in 1973, our Korea-Indonesia relations have achieved remarkable development in areas including economic, commerce, culture, people-to-people
pada tahun
exchanges.
1973 antara Korea dan Indonesia terus meningkatkan hubungannya secara signifikan di bidang ekonomi, perdagangan, budaya, dan people-to-people exchange, diplomasi, dan keamanan.
Indonesia
is one of ASEAN's leading countries, which is the only Southeast Asian country that Korea enjoys a special strategic partnership relations with.
Indonesia merupakan negara pemimpin di ASEAN dan sekaligus adalah satu-satunya negara ASEAN yang memiliki special strategic partnership dengan kami.
Within the Indo-Pacific region, Korea and Indonesia share the same goal of peace and mutual prosperity.
Korea dan Indonesia memiliki tujuan yang sama, yaitu mewujudkan kawasan Indo-Pasifik yang damai dan sejahtera bersama.
Maintaining an international order based on norms is beneficial for both countries.
Kedua negara juga memiliki kepentingan yang sama, yakni mempertahankan tatanan internasional yang bertopang pada norma.
Today, President Joko Widodo and I have agreed to bolster our bilateral strategic cooperation in line with the changing international order.
Pada hari ini, saya dan Bapak Presiden Jokowi sepakat untuk memperkuat kerjasama strategis antara kedua negara seiring dengan perkembangan dunia yang dinamis.
First of all, we laid the groundwork for the new government's diplomacy towards ASEAN.
Pemerintah baru Korea telah membangun landasan untuk menjalin diplomasi dengan ASEAN.
ASEAN is our core partner within the Indo-Pacific region in achieving peace and mutual prosperity.
Di Korea Selatan, ASEAN merupakan mitra utama untuk perdamaian dan kesejahteraan bersama di kawasan Indo-Pasifik.
It is also one of Korea's most important factors to consider when it comes to our
ASEAN juga menjadi
Indo-Pacific
salah satu elemen
strategies.
penting atau bagian penting dalam strategi Indo-Pasifik kami.
Today, with President Joko Widodo, I shared our perspective on the strategic importance of ASEAN and conveyed our strong commitment to bolster our cooperation with ASEAN.
Saya menyampaikan kepada Bapak Presiden Jokowi bahwa penting sekali bagi Korea kedudukan ASEAN dari segi strategi, dan saya juga menyampaikan tekad untuk mempererat kerjasama dengan ASEAN.
Based on our strong support for ASEAN-centeredness, we will continue to strike a harmony between our Indo-Pacific strategies and our perspectives on ASEAN.
Korea akan mensinergikan strategi Indo-Pacific dan ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific berdasarkan dukungan kuat terhadap sentralitas ASEAN.
To this end, the two countries will continue to engage in close communication.
Kedua negara sepakat akan terus mengintensifkan komunikasi ke depan untuk mencapai hal tersebut.
Secondly, we also agreed to further promote actual cooperation between the two countries to even include supply chain and economic security. Indonesia is a country that is rich in core minerals like nickel, which is a very important material for South Korea's high-tech industries.
Yang kedua, kedua negara sepakat meningkatkan kerjasama yang konkret, dan kerjasama ini akan mencakup bidang rantai pasok dan keamanan ekonomi atau ketahanan ekonomi. Indonesia adalah negara yang kaya akan critical minerals seperti nikel. Bahan ini sangat penting bagi industri teknologi tinggi di Korea Selatan.
President Joko Widodo and I also agreed to bolster bilateral economic security cooperation, including stabilizing the supply chain for core minerals, and ultimately establish a strategic solidarity in high-tech industries such as EVs as well as batteries. In addition, within the recently launched IPEF, The two countries will continue to cooperate closely in areas of common interest of the two
Saya dan
countries.
Presiden Joko Widodo sepakat memperkokoh solidaritas yang strategis di bidang industri teknologi mutakhir seperti kendaraan listrik dan baterai dengan menstabilkan rantai pasok dan critical minerals dan memperkuat kerjasama ketahanan ekonomi antara kedua negara. Selain itu, kedua negara sepakat untuk menjalankan kerjasama yang intensif terkait agenda yang menjadi perhatian bersama di dalam kerangka IPEF atau Indo-Pacific Economic Framework yang dibentuk beberapa waktu lalu.
한국과 인도네시아의
We also
포괄적
share the same
경제
view that the
동반자
swift ratification of the
협력,
Korea-Indonesia
영내
CEPA
포괄적
and
경제
RCEP
동반자
have
협정,
contributed greatly to the
RCEP의
expansion of
조속한
bilateral
발효와
cooperation.
양국의 실질 협력 확대에 기여할 것이라는 데에도 인식을 같이 하고 있습니다. 인도네시아에 투자하고 있는 우리
I also
기업들에
asked
대한
the President's
각별한
support
관심과
and interest in
지원도
many Korean companies that
당부했습니다.
have invested
Saya
in
dan Presiden
Indonesia.
Jokowi memiliki pandangan yang sama bahwa jika IK-SEPA dan RCEP sudah berlaku, ini akan menjadi kontributor dalam memperluas kerjasama yang nyata antara kedua negara. Dalam pertemuan tingkat tinggi tadi, saya juga menyampaikan permintaan kepada Bapak Presiden Joko Widodo agar berkenan senantiasa memberikan perhatian dan dukungan kepada para pengusaha Korea Selatan yang berinvestasi di Indonesia.
조코위 대통령께서
Regarding
역점을 두고
President
계신
Jokowi's capital relocation
인도네시아
project,
수도 이전 사업에
we also
관해서도
agreed to cooperate
양측이
more
더욱
closely.
긴밀히 협력해 나가기로 했습니다.
Terkait program pemindahan IKN yang menjadi salah satu agenda prioritas Bapak Presiden Jokowi, kedua negara sepakat untuk terus memperkuat kerjasamanya.
우리의 세종시 건설
Korea's
경험은
experience of building Sejong City will serve as a good example for
오늘
Indonesia.
정상회담을
Today's summit
통해
also served as an
양국은
opportunity
수도
for us
이전
to mend
협력
our
MOU를
MOU on
개정했습니다.
capital relocation
Pengalaman
cooperation.
Korea Selatan dalam pembangunan kota Sejong bisa dijadikan referensi yang baik bagi Indonesia. Dalam pertemuan puncak hari ini, kedua negara menyepakati amandemen MOU terkait pemindahan dan pembangunan IKN.
우리 기업이
This provides a
인도네시아의
cornerstone for
새로운
Korean
수도의
companies
인프라,
to proactively contribute to the establishment of infrastructure, e-governance, smart city for Indonesia's new capital city.
마련했습니다.
Hal ini akan menjadi fondasi bagi perusahaan-perusahaan Korea Selatan untuk berkontribusi besar pada pembangunan infrastruktur, SPBB atau sistem pemerintahan berbasis elektronik, dan pembangunan smart city di ibu kota baru di Indonesia.
국방 방산 협력은
Our defense and military
양국
cooperation
관계의 또 다른
is another
핵심
core pillar
축입니다.
of our bilateral
양국이
ties.
힘을 모아
We have
개발한 차세대
congratulated the
전투기인
first pilot flight of the next generation fighter aircraft KF-21, which the two countries have built by mustering our strength.
Kerjasama bidang pertahanan dan industri pertahanan adalah pilar penting dalam hubungan kedua negara. KF-21 atau IFX jet tempur generasi terbaru yang dikembangkan oleh kedua negara telah sukses dilakukan uji terbang perdana beberapa waktu lalu ini dan kedua negara menyambut capaian tersebut.
차세대 전투기 공동 개발 사업이
We also reaffirmed our
마지막까지
commitment to
순조롭게
continue our
진행될 수
cooperation
있도록
going forward so that the
양국이
joint development
계속
project
협력해
of the
나가자는
fighter
의지를
aircrafts can be a great success
Kedua
down the
negara
road.
mencatat tekad untuk terus menjalankan kerjasama pengembangan jet tempur bersama ini agar berjalan lancar hingga selesai dikembangkan.
우리 방위 산업의
Based on Korea's
세계적
world-class
기술력과
technology and
생산력을
production
토대로
capabilities within the
여타
defense
방산
industry,
협력도
we also agreed to
앞으로
cooperate in
적극
other
추진해
defense
나가기로
areas
했습니다.
as well.
Program kerjasama lainnya di bidang industri pertahanan juga akan terus dijalankan secara proaktif dengan memanfaatkan kemampuan teknologi dan kemampuan produksi Korea yang berkelas dunia.
마지막으로 주요
Lastly,
국제
we
현안에
agreed to
관한
bolster coordination
공조를
on
심화하기로
major
했습니다.
global issues.
인도네시아는 동남아
Indonesia
중
is the only
유일한
country in
G20
Southeast Asia
회원국이자
that is a member of the
금년
G20,
의장국입니다.
and it serves as
Kedua
its chair
negara
this
sepakat
year.
untuk memperdalam kerjasama terkait isu global terkini. Indonesia adalah satu-satunya anggota G20 di Asia Tenggara dan memegang presidensi G20 tahun ini.
우리 정부는
My government
인도네시아의
proactively sent support
G20
for
의장국
Indonesia's
활동을
chair as the
적극
G20.
지지합니다. 올해 11월
And we sincerely hope that the upcoming G20 summits, slated for November this year, will be a great success. And we will also take part in this as well.
Dukungan penuh kepada Indonesia sebagai tuan rumah G20. Saya sangat menantikan November tahun ini untuk menghadiri KTT G20 di Bali dan saya akan bekerja sama secara proaktif dengan Indonesia agar KTT G20 ini berjalan sukses.
북한의 핵
We also shared our concerns over North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. We agreed to work together to enable the international society to respond to them in a coordinated manner.
Kami berdua memiliki pandangan yang sama bahwa ancaman nuklir dan rudal dari Korea Utara mengkhawatirkan dan sepakat berupaya bersama untuk menyatukan masyarakat internasional dalam menghadapi hal tersebut.
우크라이나 사태 해결과
We also agreed to closely cooperate on global issues, including the Ukrainian crisis, global food and energy crisis, and also the restoration of democracy in Myanmar, and to alleviate a humanitarian crisis within the country.
Korea dan Indonesia akan melakukan kerjasama yang intensif terkait situasi di Ukraina, pangan dan krisis energi. Kedua negara juga akan terus berupaya untuk pemulihan demokrasi di Myanmar dan akan terus memberikan bantuan agar krisis kemanusiaan segera diakhiri.
While talking to President Joko Widodo today, I felt that we have many in common. Marking the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between Korea and Indonesia next year, I sincerely hope that our special strategic partnership relations can develop even further. To this end, I hope to meet regularly with President Joko Widodo going forward to engage in dialogue. Thank you very much.
Dengan Bapak Presiden Jokowi hari ini, saya merasa kita punya banyak kesamaan. Mengingat tahun depan kita akan menyambut peringatan 50 tahun hubungan diplomatik Korea-Indonesia, diharapkan Special Strategic Partnership kedua negara dapat selangkah lebih maju. Untuk itu, saya berharap agar memiliki lebih banyak kesempatan untuk bersuah dan berkomunikasi dengan Bapak Presiden Joko Widodo. Terima kasih.
네, 다음은 조코 위도도 인도네시아
Next,
공화국
we will hear
대통령께서
from
발표하겠습니다.
Mr. Joko Widodo, President of the Republic of Indonesia.
Pak Joko Widodo akan menyampaikan hasil pertemuan bilateral.
Yang Mulia Presiden Yoon Suk Yeol, Korea Selatan merupakan salah satu mitra penting Indonesia di Asia Timur.
윤석열 대통령님께서 한국은
President
동아시아에서
Yoon
인도네시아의 중요한 파트너
has
중
mentioned
하나입니다.
that Indonesia is one of the most
Indonesia
important partners
dan
for
Korea
South
Selatan adalah
Korea.
mitra strategis khusus. Dan tahun depan kita juga akan memperingati 50 tahun persahabatan dua negara kita.
한국과 인도네시아는 특별 전략적
Indonesia
파트너이고
and South Korea is a
내년에
special
우리는
strategic
또한
partnership
영국의
relations, and next
후보
year
50
marks the
주년을 기념할
50th
것입니다.
anniversary of the
Saya
establishment
yakin
of
di bawah
diplomatic ties.
kepemimpinan Presiden Yoon, kemitraan kita akan semakin kokoh ke depan, terutama kemitraan di bidang ekonomi.
그래서 저는 윤 대통령님께서 리더십 아래
So
우리의
under the
파트너십의
leadership
미래와
of President
특히
Yoon,
경제
I sincerely
부문에서
look forward to
더욱
our continued
강화될
bolstering of our
것이라고
cooperation
믿습니다.
in many areas, including
Kita
economic
menyambut baik
ties.
tren perdagangan bilateral yang terus meningkat. Dan kita sepakat untuk terus membuka akses pasar, mengatasi hambatan perdagangan, dan mempromosikan produk-produk unggulan kedua negara.
오늘은 양국 교역 증가 질서를 환영합니다.
Today, I would like to
우리는
welcome the
계속해서
increased
시장
volume
접근을
of
개방하고
trade between the two
무역
countries.
장벽을
We also
극복하며
agreed to
양국의
overcome
우수한
any
제품을
trade barriers so that
홍보하는
we
데
can
동의합니다.
promote our goods to
Implementasi
each
konkret
other
dari
countries.
Indonesia-Korea Economic Partnership Agreement akan mendorong pemenuhan berbagai target ini.
인도네시아 한경제 동반자 협정의
With the
구체적인
Korea-Indonesia
이행을 이러한
SEPA,
목표 달성을
and under
촉진할
its
것입니다.
initiative, we will be aiming its
Investasi
goals.
Korea Selatan di Indonesia juga mengalami pertumbuhan pesat dan prospek yang baik.
한국의 인도네시아 투자 역시 빠른
Korea's
성장과 좋은
investment to
전망입니다.
Indonesia is also very
khususnya di
positive
beberapa
and
bidang
also has
termasuk
great
industri
prospects.
baja, petrokimia, baterai kendaraan listrik, industri kabel listrik, dan telekomunikasi, serta garment dan energi terbarukan.
특히 절강 산업,
In particular, in the chemical areas, EV and communications, as well as energy and batteries, we would like to
Dalam
welcome the
pertemuan dengan
investment to
Presiden
Indonesia.
Yoon, secara khusus saya mendorong kerjasama investasi dari Korea, terutama di bidang percepatan pembangunan ekosistem mobil listrik di Indonesia, termasuk proyek industri baterai terintegrasi dengan pertambangan dan industri baja otomotif untuk kendaraan listrik.
윤 대통령 만났을 때 회담했을 때
Meeting with
특별히
President Yoon
한국 투자
today,
협력을
he's
추진하고 있습니다.
especially mentioned the continued cooperation
전기차
with the
에코시스템을 하고
companies,
강화 속으로
and he has
특히
mentioned
인도네시아의
to boost
배터리
the
프로젝트를
investment
하고
in
그다음에
Indonesia's battery
인도네시아의
projects, as well as
자동차,
Indonesia's
전기차 쪽이 절강
EVs
산업이라고 합니다.
as well.
Selain itu, kita juga telah memulai kerjasama dalam pengembangan Ibu Kota Baru Nusantara, antara lain kerjasama di bidang pembangunan, sistem penyediaan air minum, dan capacity building di bidang pembangunan smart city.
우리는 누산타라 새로운 수도 개발 협력
We
시작합니다.
also will be starting our cooperation in relocating our capital city to Nusantara, and this includes the smart city cooperation as well as the development of clean
Dan
water.
terkait dengan hal ini, saya menyambut baik penandatanganan MOU antara Kementerian Investasi, Posko Korea, dan Krakatau Steel Indonesia terkait dengan investasi di bidang industri baja otomotif untuk kendaraan listrik dan partisipasi dalam pengembangan ibu kota Nusantara.
그래서 저는 인도네시아 투자부와 포스코와 크라카텔 스틸
Together
양의
with
각서를
POSCO
서명하는 것을
and
환영합니다.
Indonesia's
이
infrastructure
분야의
department,
자동차
I
절강
welcome
산업 투자
our signing of the
협력하고
MOU, and
인도네시아
with the
누산타라
MOU,
수도
we will
개발
continue to
참여하는
cooperate
기획이라고
in the
합니다.
EV sector as well as the
Nilai
movement of the
investasinya
capital city
keseluruhan
to
mencapai
Nusantara.
6,37 miliar US dollar dan akan menyerap lebih dari 58 ribu tenaga kerja.
총 투자 금액이 67억 2천만 달러라고 합니다.
The total
그래서
investment
인도네시아
hovers
근로자가
over 6.7 billion,
8천 근로자들이
and we
포함합니다.
believe that it will
Dan
create more
terakhir,
jobs
saya
to Indonesia as
mengapresiasi
well.
dukungan Korea Selatan bagi presidensi Indonesia di G20 tahun ini dan menantikan kehadiran Presiden Yoon di Bali di bulan November yang akan datang.
그래서 마지막으로
Last but
인도네시아
not least,
의장국 G20
As
정국에
the
대해서
chair of
한국의
the G20 this
지원을
year, Indonesia
한국의
would like
지원을
to thank
감사드립니다.
Korea for
인도네시아-
its
윤
support.
대통령님이
And I
인도네시아
sincerely hope that
G20
President
회담-
Yoon will
회담하는
also
것을
attend the G20
발리에서
summit in
기대하고
Bali
있습니다.
in November.
Demikian yang dapat saya sampaikan. Terima kasih.
네, 마치겠습니다.
This
감사합니다.
concludes my speech. Thank you very much.
네, 이상으로 공동 언론 발표를 마치겠습니다. 참석해 주신
This
언론
concludes
여러분께
the
감사
press
인사
conference.
올리겠습니다.
Good evening. We started our newscast this evening with a joint special coverage of a joint statement made by South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Indonesian President Joko Widodo. President Widodo is in South Korea, and this comes as he held his first face-to-face summit with President Yoon Suk-yeol this afternoon. Now, on the occasion of their summit, South Korea and Indonesia have agreed to partner up in so-called green investments. Before that, Indonesian President Joko Widodo started his schedule today by meeting some of South Korea's top business executives. The leader and his administration are keen on attracting South Korea's biggest firms to their country. Han Sung-woo with more.
South Korea and Indonesia have signed a memorandum of cooperation that will help Korean firms invest in sustainable green technologies throughout Indonesia more conveniently, including renewable energy, electric vehicles, and batteries. It not only involves more investment into the country, but also the development and transferring of technologies. Ahead of his summit with President Yoon, Indonesian President Joko Widodo met with South Korean business executives in Seoul on Thursday to discuss ways for Korean companies to strengthen investment in his country and bolster economic cooperation. Among those firms was one of the world's largest steel companies, POSCO, which signed an MOU with the Indonesian government and Indonesian state-owned steelmaker PT Krakatau Steel to boost production capacity and participate in the construction of its new capital city. POSCO and Krakatau Steel will jointly invest $3.5 billion over the next 5 years to build a second blast furnace and a cold rolling mill for Krakatau POSCO. A consortium led by LG, meanwhile, is pursuing an $8.5 billion project to establish a value chain for EVs in the Southeast Asian country. Last year, Hyundai Motor and LG Energy Solution began building an EV battery plant in Indonesia with the aim of starting production in the first half of 2024. Indonesia has one of the world's largest deposits of nickel, a core material for EV batteries. After Thursday morning's business dialogue, Widodo was originally due to stop by Hyundai Motors' Namyang R&D Center, but had to cancel due to the tight schedule of his visit, and send other officials instead. But the president had a separate talk with the head of the company, Jong-un, with whom he reportedly discussed smart city technology and future industries, including eco-friendly mobility. 한성우, Arirang News.
Now, going back to the joint declaration made by the two leaders, as we said, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Indonesian President Joko Widodo held a bilateral this afternoon. For more on this, we connect to the presidential office in Yongsan, where our editor-in-chief Moon Gun-young stands by. Gun-young, the joint conference came to a close just moments ago. What are we learning about it?
Well, it just did, Mugen. Presidents Yoon and Widodo just released a joint statement following a bilateral summit just minutes ago. Indonesian President Joko Widodo arrived here at Seoul's presidential office about 2.5 hours ago, welcomed by an honors guard to mark his first official visit since President Yoon took office back in May. Of course, greeted by the new South Korean leader, the two sides went in for a bilateral for about 2 hours. Now, the two sides basically agreed to scale up trade and expand cooperation in areas such as economic security, infrastructure, and defense industry to so they can take their special strategic partnership to another level. Now, for South Korea and the Yoon administration, this isn't just about boosting ties with Indonesia, but this marks or signals the start of its full-fledged diplomacy with the ASEAN. Remember, boasting a 270 million strong population, Indonesia makes up about more than 40% of the ASEAN population, and its economic output accounts for more than a third of the entire ASEAN GDP. Now, ASEAN being one of President Yoon Suk-yeol's key pillars of his to-be-unveiled Indo-Pacific strategy, many officials here at the top office say this is the first engagement with Indonesia is pretty significant in many ways. Mogyan.
Right. So, Gun-young, can you tell us some more about the specific agreements made between the two leaders? What did the Indonesian president have to say?
Right, so Joko Widodo's comments mostly focused on investment, infrastructure, and the G20 summit. Widodo welcomed new South Korean investments in Indonesia, such as the billions of dollars of worth investment in creating the EV supply chain, using the plethora of rich nickel reserves in Indonesia, making use of that, and an agreement to help facilitate Indonesia's $32 billion project to relocate its capital from Jakarta to Nusantara in Borneo Island. Remember, the two are also the founding members of the U.S.-led Economic or Trade Initiative, IPEF, and should RCEP and CEPA be ratified by the legislatures, this could even give room for even further economic cooperation between the two. Meanwhile, they aren't without thorny issues. There have been issues over Indonesian participation in the KF-21 fighter jet development program, where with Jakarta failing to pay their 20% share of its cost in return for industrial participation. That was also discussed at the summit level today as the heads of state reaffirmed their commitment to proceed with the collaboration. Now, as a rotating chair of the G20 summit this year, Jokowi invited President Yoon to the November summit, to which Yoon said he looks forward to participating and wished a complete success of that summit. Now that the joint presser is over, President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gun-hee will be hosting a dinner banquet for the Indonesian first couple, after which Indonesian President Joko Widodo will wrap up his 5-day Asia tour, which also took him to China and Japan. Mogyun.
All right, thank you for the updates. That was our editor-in-chief Moon Gan-young reporting from the presidential office. Now moving on, Poland is buying a large number of South Korean weapon systems. This is going to be South Korea's biggest weapons export deal to date, projected to be worth more than $14 billion in total. Bae Eun-ji tells us more.
South Korea has secured a massive arms deal with Poland. This includes F-A-50 fighter jets and K2 armored tanks that are being exported from Korea to a NATO country for the first time. The exact value of the deal hasn't been confirmed yet, but the arms package is expected to be around $14.5 billion in total. The manufacturer of the F-A-50 fighters, the Korea Aerospace Industries, announced Thursday that it signed a framework agreement with Poland the day before to sell 48 of its aircraft. It said the deal is worth around $3 billion. The light combat aircraft has a speed of Mach 1.5 and can be armed with air-to-air, air-to-ground missiles, as well as a 20mm gun. Poland will also purchase 1,000 of K2 Black Panther tanks made by South Korea's Hyundai Rotem. The company said Thursday that it has signed a basic deal with Poland to export the armored vehicles that can be equipped with an auto-loading 120mm gun. Around 180 of the tanks are expected to arrive in Poland first, and production for the rest will start in 2026 in Poland. Under the framework deal, South Korea will also be selling 648 of its K9 self-propelled howitzers to the European country. The manufacturer, Hanwha Defense, said it plans to build a new branch in Poland to provide the 47-ton howitzer. At the signing ceremony for the framework agreement, Poland's defense chief had said it needs to replace equipment it donated to Ukraine, and South Korean weapon systems were the right fit. Through the deal, South Korean defense companies' exports for this year have already topped 25 trillion Korean won, or almost $20 billion. The record high is more than 2.5 times that of last year. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
A launching ceremony was held earlier this morning for a new South Korean naval destroyer in the southeastern port city of Ulsan. There, President Yoon Suk-yeol thanked those involved for their hard work and vowed to strengthen South Korea's maritime capabilities. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jang-min reports.
Becoming a new maritime power and tapping the defense sector as a new growth engine. Those were the two key messages from President Yoon Suk-yeol on Thursday as he delivered remarks celebrating the launch of ROKS Cheongjo the Great at Hyundai Heavy Industries shipyard in Ulsan.
바다에서 우리 스스로를 지키는 해양 강국의 역량을 갖춰야만 경제 강국이 될 수 있습니다. 국민들께서 바다에서 안전하게 경제 활동을 펼칠 수 있도록 강력한 해양 안보를 구축할 것입니다.
The South Korean commander-in-chief expressed confidence in his navy and sailors for defending the waters and a de facto maritime border between the two Koreas.
저는 국군 통수권자로서 우리의 바다를 지켜내고 NLL을 사수한 해군 장병 여러분들을 무한히 신뢰합니다. 임전무태의 정신으로 우리의 바다를 든든하게 지켜주시기를 바랍니다.
He also pledged to nurture the Korean defense sector as a national strategic industry for economic growth, citing that South Korea has recaptured the #1 spot in winning global shipbuilding contracts in the first half of this year. First Lady Kim Gon-hee cut the tethers of the vessel with a small axe, which has symbolic meaning of cutting an umbilical cord of a newborn baby. ROK's Jong-jo the Great, named after the Joseon Dynasty monarch King Jong-jo, is a national strategic asset and a core axis of the Korea air and missile defense system against North Korea's missile and nuclear programs. It's South Korea's first 8,200-ton Aegis destroyer built entirely with homegrown technology. The destroyer will be delivered to the Korean Navy in 2024 for actual use after a trial voyage period. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un says he's ready to eliminate the South Korean government and military if there was a preemptive attack. He also accused the U.S. of double standards over its military activities. Kim's comments came during what was his first appearance in public in nearly 3 weeks. Lee Kyung-eun with the details.
The first ever warning from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol came on Wednesday, the anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement. According to North State media, Kim targeted the Yoon government and what he calls military gangsters, saying that any attempt at preemptively attacking the North will be immediately punished, and that the Yoon government and his army will be eliminated.
There seems to be a growing mistrust felt by the regime since the time of the election period, when President Yoon repeatedly spoke about preemptive strikes and called the North the main enemy.
Another expert says it is seen as Pyongyang officially declaring a hostile policy on the South after monitoring Seoul's movements since the Yoon government kicked off in May. But many come to agree that the warning is being raised to a very high level, especially considering that the leader called President Yoon by his name in a rather disrespectful manner compared to the past when he used to call South Korean president ruler or by other titles. The presidential office expressed deep regret over the speech.
The presidential office expresses deep regret over the threatening remarks made to our government while also calling the president by his name.
The spokesperson added that Seoul is maintaining its defense posture and will protect its people through a strong alliance with the U.S. But that very alliance is also what Kim Jong-un denounced during the speech. While South Korea and the U.S. joint drills is set for late August, Kim accused Washington of double standards over its military activities. The leader added that he is ready to fight the U.S., citing nuclear deterrence. Observers largely see Kim Jong-un's latest speech as something that will fuel tensions between the two Koreas, as the North is preparing for its first nuclear test since 2017. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
For the second month in a row, the U.S. Federal Reserve has raised its benchmark interest rate by 0.75 of a percentage point to between 2.25% and 2.5%. The Fed is trying to fight inflation now at its highest levels in 40 years. That puts even more pressure on smaller countries, including South Korea, to follow the Fed's lead. Ji-young reports.
The U.S. Federal Reserve raised its benchmark overnight interest rates by 0.75 of a percentage point for a second straight meeting. At the end of its two-day policy meeting on Wednesday, the Federal Open Market Committee announced its largest back-to-back rate increase. The adjustment brings the cumulative June to July raise to 150 basis points, which is the most aggressive tightening since 1981. The short-term borrowing rates now stand between 2.25% and 2.5%, similar to levels in 2019. The decision, despite risking a sharp hit to the economy, was unanimously agreed upon by voting members of the FOMC to crush inflation, which is running at rates unseen in 4 decades, reaching 9.1% in June.
Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring demand into better balance with supply in order to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored.
Powell said that this process is likely to involve a period of below-trend economic growth and some softening in labor market conditions, but added he does not think the U.S. economy is currently in a recession.
There are just too many areas of the economy that are performing, too well. And of course, I would point to the labor market in particular. As I mentioned, it's true that growth is slowing. And for reasons that we understand, really the growth was extraordinarily high last year, 5.5%. We would have expected growth to slow.
He also signaled a possible third hike, saying the Fed anticipates that ongoing increases in the target range will be appropriate. But one expert says it's unlikely that interest rate increases will be as big as the last two rate hikes.
I think it's more likely that we're going to see some better numbers for headline inflation because energy prices in the U.S. have come down a bit and some food prices have come down. Probably what will happen in September will most likely be 50 basis points.
The Fed's aggressive monetary tightening also has global repercussions. The U.S. interest rates have surpassed those of South Korea for the first time in 2.5 years, which could lead to capital outflows from South Korea. But Seoul's finance minister says the effect of the Fed's rate hike on local financial markets is likely to be limited.
In the past, there were 3 times that the Fed's benchmark interest rates have gone above South Korea's, but during those rate increases by the Fed, foreign stock investments maintained net inflows.
Chu added that the government will closely monitor the situation and expend preemptive measures against any risks. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Now, a bigger than usual rate hike was expected this week from the Federal Reserve. The certainty from that led to a big gain in U.S. stocks. The Fed's raising rates at the fastest it has in decades, though, and that has implications for everything from economic growth, which Chairman Powell acknowledged, to jobs, home loans, and the South Korean capital market. And it doesn't seem like the Biden administration thinks the U.S. is in a recession. There'll be data out tomorrow. For a closer look at the situation, we are pleased to welcome to the program this evening Dr. Shim Myung-kyu, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Professor Shim, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the Federal Reserve did what was largely expected with this 75 percentage point rate hike. Still, some had said we'd need 100 basis points to really make a difference on inflation. What do you make of the Fed's decision?
At this point, the change in the interest rate seems reasonable to me. While the GDP growth rate of the U.S. became negative in the first quarter of this year, the labor market seems to be solid, at least until now. Given that the current unemployment rate in the U.S. is about below 4%, while worries about inflation still remain in the economy, in my opinion, this giant step seems to make sense. In addition, too rapid change in the interest rate might have unexpected impacts on the aggregate economy. For example, the U.S. economy might experience a hard landing because of the too fast cool down of the aggregate demand. So in that sense, I think it's a kind of the reasonable choice by the Fed.
Right. We'll have to see what they do next in September. Well, the stock market, as I mentioned, reacted positively to the decision. The NASDAQ had its biggest one-session gain since April 2020. But before, there was a great deal of fear about what rate hikes would mean for the market. Have investors priced in a series of interest rate hikes going forward?
Yeah, I think so. It seems that the market has priced in the series of the event that the Fed policy has made the steep rise of the interest rate. Given that the inflation rate has been steadily high for the last several months, it was inevitable for the Fed to have a giant step, and hence a lot of economists and professional forecasters have expected 3/4 hike in the interest rate. And this sort of expectation seems to be widely agreed across the market participants, especially in the stock market. And hence, the expected move by the Fed has relieved the concerns of the investors, at least to me. So making gain in the NASDAQ and KOSPI today. If the decision of the Fed was more hawkish than what market has expected, I guess we would have observed the decline of the stock price instead.
Right. We'll have to see how that moves. We move forward with that, and how the market reacts over the next few months. Well, Professor, the Biden administration is saying the U.S. is not currently in a recession. President Biden has said that, along with the Treasury Secretary. Even a minute ago, we heard Jay Powell said that. But a lot of Americans feel that times are not good economically. GDP data is due out very soon. Do you think it'll show the U.S. in a recession?
Yeah, unfortunately, my answer is yes. Considering the negative effects of the interest hike during the last several months on the aggregate economy and the resurgence of the COVID-19 in the US, that can lower private activities. I cannot be that positive about the GDP announced a few hours later from now on. If the growth rate becomes negative again, as is expected, it satisfies the widely accepted criterion on the definition of the recession, as we observed 2 consecutive quarters of the decline of real GDP. I think that the IMF has already reflected such a negative view on the economy, and hence it has cut down its forecast on the US GDP from 3.7% to 2.3%, and also the same conclusion on the global economy.
Right. We all know that textbook definition of recession. You mentioned 2 quarters in a row of negative growth. If that comes out, we'll have to see how the Biden administration will deal with that claim about not being in a recession. But Professor, the federal funds rate is now higher than the Bank of Korea's policy rate. Does that mean, as many think, that the BOK has no choice but to keep raising interest rates as well? Is it going to speed up? And what does all this mean for the Korean economy?
To me, it seems that there is no choice for the BOK other than raising the interest rate. Similar to the US, the inflation rate in South Korea has reached 6% in June, a level that we have not experienced during the last 2 decades, actually more than 2 decades. Hence, not only the giant step of the Fed, but the surge of the inflation rate seem to make the BOK have no other option than raising the interest rate and upcoming in the upcoming committee. This move will have some negative impacts on the Korean economy. For instance, it will cool down consumer demand, as South Korea's household debt is at a very high level, and household debt with variable interest rate takes significant portion of it. In addition, such a rise would negatively affect the asset prices, as we have observed recently, adding the negative effect on consumption. So my expectation, which I believe is in line with many other economists, is that we would experience a hard time that we need to endure for some time.
So last time, just to follow up, Professor, last time we saw a 50 basis point rate hike from the BOK. That would be what they follow through with next time as well?
I think so.
think so?
I'm not sure, but that's my expectation.
Well, we'll have to see. Finally, Professor, the exchange rate for the Korean currency, it's come down today to right about 1,300 won to the dollar. It's depreciated significantly over the past several months. Higher rates would seem to mean that the Korean won will continue to depreciate. Even though this could be good for exports, makes them more competitive, what can be done to stabilize the exchange rate?
According to the report published by the BOK and according to the news that you have already showed, capital outflows during the episodes with the reversal of the interest rate between South Korea and the US were not of great concerns in South Korea. So based on these experiences, the higher interest rate in the US would not necessarily lower the value of Korean won, and hence I think the depreciation of Korean won due to the reversal of the interest rate might not happen. But in addition, given that the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, has hinted that the Fed might lower the pace of the interest rate hike, I guess the stabilization policy for the exchange rate may not be that necessary at this point.
You highlight Finance Minister Chu's remarks about it's not necessarily going to happen that way. Well, Professor Shim, we're going to have to leave it there for today. Thank you for coming on the program. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
The Yoon administration has identified 50 regulations it wants to change or get rid of to boost the economy. These changes would allow delivery robots to use city sidewalks. They would ease the rules on selling health foods that have special ingredients like vitamins and allow smartphone versions of business credit cards. Lee Dae-hyun has the details.
South Korea is ready to cut red tape to encourage economic growth.
Reforming economic regulations is now a must to boost South Korea's potential. The government vows to abolish unnecessary measures that constrain businesses and markets while ensuring growth led by the private sector.
In an economic deregulation task force meeting held by the Ministry of Economy and Finance on Thursday, government officials announced a total of new 50 measures. Among them was ways to step up the use of robots and drones. Regulations will be eased by 2023 so that safety-verified delivery robots can drive on sidewalks without restrictions. This will lead to growth in the robotics industry and a reduction in delivery costs for companies. Also, the safety verification inspection process will be simplified to reduce cost and time, while camera drones will be used for gas pipeline inspections. Also, restrictions will be eased for the health and medical sectors. Large supermarkets and department stores will be eligible to sell what's called health functional food, food manufactured with functional raw materials or ingredients like vitamins without needing a special business license. Measures will be further discussed to allow mobile X-ray machines to be used outside of hospitals, while non-medical care services will be expanded too. New rules for an eco-friendly environment will be established as well. The government is planning to reform the Building Act to allow the installation of wind turbines on rooftops of buildings like schools, apartments, and factories. Administrative procedures will also be shortened to swiftly process subsidies and tax benefits for eco-friendly cars. The country also aims to go digital. Financial institutions will be eligible to issue mobile corporate credit cards. Only personal mobile credit cards are allowed currently. Also, a mobile driver's license will be available in other smartphone apps too, such as those used for mobile banking and not just ones issued by government institutions. Other measures include recruiting foreign talent by establishing new types of visas. The new E7S visa is for high-income earners and high-tech industry workers. An internship visa will also be set up for foreign university students too. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has recorded its highest ever second quarter sales with solid revenue from semiconductors and displays. Chip makers are likely going to make some adjustments though because demand is expected to decline in the latter half of this year. Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics posted a strong performance in the second quarter, recording its highest ever sales for Q2 despite geopolitical issues and inflation around the world. The company on Thursday reported sales of around 77 trillion Korean won, at the current rate roughly $59 billion, up about 21% compared to the same quarter last year. That marks the second highest sales for any quarter on record. Operating profit for the same period jumped more than 12% on year to just under 15 trillion won, which is about $10.8 billion. According to one analyst, the increase was mainly due to greater demand for semiconductor and OLED displays. However, despite the new record set for Q2, sales were down from the quarter before. This was apparently on a decline in sales of smartphones and TVs.
Sales of smartphones dropped sharply from the first quarter due to inflation and China's lockdowns. TV sales were down in line with an overall decline in the TV market, while rising raw material prices hurt the profitability of home appliances.
South Korea's semiconductor industry has remained strong overall in the global market. According to the presidential office, South Korea ranked second in the global market last year with a share of 20%. Exports of semiconductors hit $128 billion last year, taking up the largest proportion of the total exports at 20%. To support the chip industry, the government recently announced plans to encourage chip-related companies to invest by giving them tax benefits. It also promised to help the industry in terms of training and R&D. In the meantime, an expert says chip makers are likely going to make some adjustments, with demand expected to decline for the rest of this year.
Because of geopolitical issues and global inflation, chip makers will likely adjust their investment. When there is an economic downturn, chip firms tend to adjust their production based on demand and boost their technological capabilities instead to secure cost competitiveness.
He added that due to external factors, companies including Samsung could take a conservative approach until the first half of next year. 신하영, Arirang News.
South Korea's Financial Services Commission has announced that it's going to take stern action against illegal short selling in the stock market by stepping up monitoring of the practice and confiscating profits when firms violate the rules. The announcement Thursday followed a meeting with related agencies the day before. President Yoon has called on officials to take action amid calls from retail investors to ban short selling. They claim it's enabled institutional investors to manipulate the market and cause stock prices to fall. Several firms have been fined this year for breaking the rules, such as by failing to make proper disclosures. Short selling is only recently resumed, having been banned during the pandemic to prevent excess volatility. The FSC said the relevant agencies will continue talks on the issue. South Korea's first lunar orbiter, Danuri, was due to launch next Wednesday on a SpaceX rocket, but it looks like that'll have to wait until next Friday. South Korea's Ministry of Science and ICT said Thursday that SpaceX has to postpone the launch due to maintenance. It said SpaceX will launch Danuri next Friday, August 5th. If all goes well, the launch at Cape Canaveral, Florida will take place at around 8 a.m. Korean Standard Time. Danuri was sent to Cape Canaveral earlier this month.
15 seconds.
Arirang. What matters?
Feel like a young wave. Where's the VIP?
Swag a trova.
Asian drunk, yeah. They call it poop, yeah. We hit the poop, sounds like cool, make that boom, yeah. Born and Clyde, yeah. Cha-cha, we hit the poop, sounds like cool, make it new, yeah. Asian drunk, yeah. They call it poop, yeah. We hit the poop, sounds like cool, make that boom, yeah. Born and Clyde, yeah. Cha-cha, we hit the poop, sounds like cool, make it new, yeah.
널 소리 뱉 마치 드럼바지 비트리 랩 우린 한국 스럼의 멋을 대표 세련된 촌스러움 이거지 됐어
야 달라 억지 같은 멋은 버리고 새 멋을 땡겨 야 당황스러운 무대 구성을 치우고 기본이 챙겨 야 방황 하늘 동서 누가 보기에도 멋이 없어 소리 배는 기본이 되는 복잡고 니들에게 보여줬어 생이 흔치 않은 no we got a lot of sweat 이거 멋이고 차분한 shit rap 때려박냐 unbalance 이거 멋이고 I feel so good right now maybe I had a drink or two but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Trade ministers of the 14 IPEF member countries held a two-day ministerial meeting that began on Tuesday. South Korea's very own Trade Minister Jong-un also took part in the discussions. The IPEF was officially formed by U.S. President Joe Biden during his visit to South Korea last May, and it's largely aimed by the U.S. to counter China's growing presence in the Indo-Pacific region. The latest meeting is considered as a prelude to the group's first face-to-face meeting set for early September in Los Angeles. For more, we are joined on Zoom by Kang Sun-ju, professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Good evening, Professor Kang.
Thanks for having me. Good evening.
So what kinds of topics have been chosen for the discussions during this summit and during the latest ministerial meeting, and were they able to make a joint statement?
Yes, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, so-called IPEF, was launched last May. Upon launching the IPEF, the 13, now it is 14, but at the time there was 13, the 13 participating countries agreed to cover 4 general topics like trade, supply chains, decarbonization infrastructure, and taxation and anti-corruption. The first ministerial meeting on Monday and Tuesday was held to discuss the scope of the 4 topics so that they can start formal negotiations at a later date.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems reasonable, not disappointing, that the ministerial meeting did not make a joint statement. Nevertheless, the scoping discussion for the 4 topics was an important first step toward formal text-based negotiations of the IPEF. I think so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned that the IPEF is currently at its first important step it's taken.
Yes.
Then when do you expect some tangible results to come out from the meetings?
Negotiating a free trade agreement usually takes a few years, like 2 to 3, 4 years. To be clear, the IPEF is not going to be a free trade agreement in a traditional sense. However, it is likely to take a sufficiently long time for the IPEF to show some tangible results. Mm-hmm. Upon launching the IPEF last May, the United States expected that IPEF negotiations would last up to 18 months and announced its final agreement at Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, so-called APEC Leaders Summit, that the United States will host in this November 2023. So November 2023 seems to be the earliest time that the world will see what the IPEF will look like. Yeah.
Right. So we'll have to wait and see until what kind of agreements would be made out of the group.
Yeah.
Now, China has been expressing continuous regret about the framework itself, and now that we're awaiting a face-to-face meeting in the coming months, how do you think China would further react to this?
From the beginning, China has publicly expressed its opposition or discontent to the IPEF, calling it an effort to contain China. Beijing may try to actively slow down IPEF negotiations by discouraging the member countries from active participation, or it may set up its own separate initiative to counter the IPEF. There is already concern among the IPEF countries that China will engage in coercive acts against joining the IPEF. Mm-hmm. This would not be unprecedented. South Korea experienced this before, but it would be an overreaction from China, I guess. The IPEF is not an effort to contain China, nor is it an hostile act against China. Rather than thinking about how to retaliate against the IPEF, China, as the second largest economy in the world, should think about ways to stabilize economic relations in the Indo-Pacific region, There has been a lot of economic disruptions since the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is responsible for China. It is responsible for China to take actions or measures to keep economic relations undisrupted in the Indo-Pacific region. Yeah.
Right. Well, like you've mentioned, China is an economic power, and it's also a crucial trade partner with South Korea, and they are actually unhappy about the framework. How do you think South Korea should go about its diplomatic policies with Washington and Beijing at this time?
Yes, China has been South Korea's top trading partner more than 10 years. On the other hand, the United States and Korea have been allied with each other longer than a half century. Recently, it has become difficult for South Korea to maintain balance between the United States and China, although there need not be fundamental trade-off between economic and security relations. Having said that, South Korea should convey to China a message that its involvement in IPEF is not meant to counter China, but it is part of its effort to address new economic challenges in the 21st century and increase the country's presence in the Indo-Pacific region. And it would be useful and strategic for South Korea to bring other partners in the IPEF on board in its effort to persuade China for better relations. I think it is not only South Korea that sees certain difficulties in relation to China, but other IPEF member countries will see the similar problems with China. So it will be very strategic and calculated measure for South Korea to bring other IPEF members together to convey positive message to China. Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, Professor Kang, thank you for making time for us and for your insights. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And now to the latest in Ukraine. Ukrainian troops have targeted a key bridge in the southern region of Kherson that's being used to reinforce occupying Russian forces. Ukraine's national security advisor said Wednesday that the country used equipment donated by Western nations to target the Antony-Visky Bridge. In Donetsk, to the east, Ukraine was able to repel Russian offensives in the city of Bakhmut, but lost ground with the country's second largest power plant being taken over. The Ukrainian Navy also said that Black Sea ports are preparing to begin grain exports in accordance with the deal signed by Ukraine and Russia last week. Meanwhile, the Biden administration made a substantial offer to exchange convicted Russian arms trafficker Viktor Bout as part of a deal to reach 2 American citizens being held by Russia, women's basketball star Brittany Griner and corporate executive Paul Whelan. Now, on Wednesday, for the anniversary of the armistice that ended combat in the Korean War, the U.S. unveiled a wall of remembrance in Washington, D.C. that lists the names of some 43,000 American and South Korean soldiers who died in the war. The ceremony was attended by top officials and business leaders from South Korea. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
A new Korean War monument with the names of fallen heroes inscribed upon it was unveiled in Washington on Wednesday. The dedication of the Wall of Remembrance was marked by a ceremony that brought together some 3,000 people, including government officials, Korean War veterans, as well as their families from both South Korea and the U.S. The wall bears the names of over 43,000 service members from South Korea and America who were killed during the war. During the ceremony, a message from South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was read by Minister of Veterans Affairs Bang Min-sik on his behalf.
Korean War veterans, you are the guardians of freedom and true heroes who protected the Republic of Korea.
The message stressed that the new monument represents the solidarity of the ROK-US alliance, adding that the sacrifices of the fallen heroes will be forever remembered. Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff joined the ceremony on behalf of President Joe Biden, who was diagnosed with COVID-19 late last week.
It's a poignant reminder of the individual sacrifices of the more than 36,000 U.S. service members and the more than 7,000 Korean troops who served together and died together in Korea.
Family members of Korean War veterans were also in Washington to see the names of their relatives.
They always called the Korean War the Forgotten War, and I think this helps to dispel some of that.
The construction of the wall cost $22 million and was funded by donations from Korean and American organizations and private donors. Building began in March 2021, with the wall officially unveiled during Wednesday's dedication ceremony. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
And now it's time for our Thursday regular arts and culture segment. And for this, our culture correspondent Kim Yeon-sin is here in the studio with us. Good evening, Yeon-sin.
Thank you for having me, Mo-Gyeon.
So what do you have for us today?
Right, so the Paris Opera Ballet is back in Korea for the first time in 30 years. And among its cast is South Korean ballerina Park Se-eun. It's Park Se-eun's first time performing in South Korea since she was crowned as a danseuse étoile, which is French for star dancer.
So Yeon-sin, what does it mean for a dancer to become an étoile in the Paris Opera Ballet?
Right, so a dancer named as an étoile are deemed as the crown jewels of this very esteemed dance company. And Park Se-eun was not only the first Korean, but she was also the first Asian to reach this top rank. And what's so significant about her achievement, even though she did seem very modest in all the interviews, is that the Paris Opera Ballet is famously traditional and exclusive with over a 3-century-old history. Unlike the New York-based American Ballet Theatre or the Royal Ballet in London, the Paris Opera Ballet only has a handful of dancers who are not French. So Park Se-eun really had to master the Paris Opera Ballet's French style of ballet to finally achieve this highest honor.
Right, Yeon-sin, so tell us more about the show today.
Right, so to give you a little bit more background about the étoile dancers in the Paris Opera Ballet, there are 16 of them, and 4 of them are here in South Korea today, and they are performing as we speak, including Park Se-eun. They are performing at the Lotte Concert Hall on Thursday evening, and if you missed today's show, there's another one at 7:30 p.m. on Friday. I was at their rehearsal yesterday, and might I add, it was just heart-wrenchingly, breathtakingly beautiful. Take a look. It's the supernova return of the star dancer. Ballerina Park Se-eun from the Paris Opera Ballet is back in her home country to perform for the first time since she was crowned as a star dancer, a danseuse étoile. The title étoile is the highest honor for dancers to hold in the distinguished Paris Opera Ballet. And never before in the ballet company's 353-year history has there been an Asian étoile.
I've waited 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to become étoile, and then when I finally heard my name as étoile, I burst into tears. It was tears of gratitude, and I thought to myself, finally, from today, my stage is beginning.
Park Se-eun worked behind the scenes to bring the Paris Opera Ballet to Seoul. And thanks to her, it's back in Korea for the first time since 1993. This time, it's presenting a gala with 10 repertoires.
I wanted to show a lot of different pieces, so I started reaching out to dancers who were perfect for them. When I told them that there's going to be gala like this in Korea, they were excited to come.
I'm very touched to be dancing with her in Korea.
The repertoires featured in the gala transcend ages and range from modern to classic.
It's a magnificent program put together by Se-eun, and it presents a wide variety of choreographies in a variety of eras.
The Paris Opera Ballet is performing at the Lotte Concert Hall this Thursday and Friday evening at 7:30. It's featuring 10 renowned dancers, 4 of whom are étoiles. Park Se-eun will be closing the show as the pained but elated lover Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, choreographed by Nureyev and music composed by Prokofiev. Park Se-eun says that she wants to live a life immersed in art, and it's her deep dedication to art that helped give the Korean audience the rare chance to immerse themselves in the world of French ballet.
Well, that certainly was beautiful, Yeon-seung. Then what else do you have for our viewers to enjoy and look forward for this weekend?
Well, I personally suggest going to the theaters because it seems like this summer is the peak season for movies. Hansan Rising Dragon opened in theaters yesterday, and it's already made its way up to the top of the ticket sales list by selling more than 380,000 tickets in just the first day. The movie is directed by Kim Han-min, who also directed Admiral Warring Currents, a movie that set a new record by garnering more than 17 million admissions in total. For those who want to watch something other than a historical film, Alienoid is in theaters right now, and this one is directed by Choi Dong-hoon, the director of another 10 million seller, The Thieves. And in August, other potential box office hits are coming, like Korean movies Emergency Declaration and Hunt.
Well, that's a long list. I'll make sure I'll be visiting the theaters this weekend. Then Yeon-seung, is there anything that children might enjoy?
Yes, of course. What about a family-friendly trip to the world of Korean animation films? So in Gwangju, right now, Asia Culture Center in Gwangju is presenting 4 digitally revived classic Korean animation films. And this is one of the rare opportunities to feel like you've gone back in time and you're watching some of the most traditional stories like Honggil-dong and Kongji Patji, drawn in such a unique and traditional Korean animation picture style.
All right, Yeon-seung, thank you so much for your report. I'll look forward to talking to you again next week.
Thank you.
Scorching hot weather will continue to grip South Korea tomorrow with heatwave alerts in place. This is because the North Pacific High, which is containing hot and humid air, is currently covering the Korean peninsula. Central regions will be especially hot tomorrow. Places like Suwon and Cheongju will see highs of 35 degrees Celsius. Also, do expect tropical nights to appear for most regions, including Seoul, with lows of 25 degrees or higher. Meanwhile, a tropical depression is forecast to strengthen into Typhoon Songda around early tomorrow morning, after it is set to move towards the East Sea of China. However, the projected pathway is subject to change, and there is a possibility that Songda may veer towards the Korean peninsula. If this is the case, some major changes will be made to the forecast next week. Make sure to keep an eye on the latest weather updates. Morning lows in Seoul will be starting off at 26 degrees. Central regions will see sporadic showers during the daytime. Seoul and Chuncheon will reach 34. Gyeongju and Jeju will be hot at 33 degrees. The south coast and Jeju Island will see rain this weekend due to the indirect influence of the typhoon. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all for News Center tonight. Thank you for staying with us. This was Kim Mo-gyan
and Devin Whiting. More news coming up on our next newscast at 10 p.m., so make sure to tune in.